think Crunch, wait a minute, you're JD Crunch man now. You had a story from those early days. So why don't you take the mic and tell us? And you can stand up so people can see you.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about the phone board called computer. If you go to those things. I was basically I was working on an electronic circuit, and I needed a computer to help me solve Chebyshev and Butterworth circuit designs and filter designs. The formulas were overly complicated, and I was told by a guy by the name of Cal about Call Computer. I go to Call Computer and I learned that I could get online for just 99 cents an hour, and for the first week I had a free account. Well, I wrote a few little programs, one of them just to get used to basic programming. I'd never programmed before. And I wrote this little program to compute the even tempered scale of music, the musical scale, just to understand how to use it. And then I started working on other things, and now after a while, I got this really complicated program, and it was kind of like Spice. You put in a circuit, and it would solve the circuit with, you know, multiple arrays using array processing and things. And I left a printout on the floor by mistake. Alex Cameron called me up and chastised me for leaving a mess in the computer room. And then he said, "What is this?" And I explained it to him, and now he hired me as a programmer. He put me in charge of the public library. And so we had some students at Mountain View High School, and Randy here and Chris were part of the development program. They called it the Apple not the Apple developers, but the Call Computer developers. And they had high school kids come in, and I teach them how to use the computer. And they set up the B900 accounts. B915 was Mountain View High School. Mine was B907. And there was a bunch of other B accounts. And I would just kind of maintain all that stuff. And I wrote cross assemblers. I did a 6800. Randy here did a 6502. And I think I did an F8 and an 8080. And this was just during the time I learned all these little machine languages, all these little processors. I had to write these little cross assemblers for it. And then later on, I did the phone board for Apple. This was like in 76, right? And I can remember back in the days, 77, yeah. Back in the days when Woz would have it was kind of in a little annex. It was kind of away from the main part. It was like the main building, and then there was a little building off to the side, little Apple lab building, and that's where Woz and Randy were there working on, I think Randy at the time worked on a little printer thing with a little 40-column printer. And they'd go to Bob's Big Boy, and they'd print out these little things for your convenience, little Alka-Seltzer tablets, or the menus of Bob's Big Boy. And then my phone board, when I got the phone board working, I did a little test program, like a little, I think it was an answering service, a little call. You could enter in the number and make the calls, and it would dial the number. The phone board was really amazing. I had originally designed it with 9 chips, using 8-bit ADD, and ADC, and then Steve here designed it with a 6-bit DAC, because it was less expensive. It just meant that I had to write more code. Oh, big deal. So it was much cheaper. So we got it down to 5 chips. And then we started playing around with it, and I realized that in order to hook things up to the telephone, you had to go through a special interface device. So at the telephone company, this was the reason why we couldn't actually market it. Because in order to interface it to the telephone line, you couldn't actually legally connect to the telephone without going through special kind of equipment. That was one reason, and the other reason is that the phone board could have evil thoughts. It could be used for naughty tones. At the time, the phone company still was using the old ancient in-band signaling, which of course caused all kinds of problems with toll fraud and other things like that. And so after a while, I gave Woz the cassette tape with a little basic program on it that he could try out. I go home, and he reprogrammed it to call Jobs' house over and over again. and so I come back to Apple the next day, and then I just get chastised. I couldn't figure out what happened. And he was like really mad, pissed off at me. Anyway, so that's kind of the story that happened around thing. I can remember also Mike Scott would smoke in the lab, and I would kick him out, and like a little Apple war there.
Actually, Mike Scott didn't smoke. He just pretended to get you out of his party.
Yeah, that was true.
So that phone board was actually kind of incredible because John, I'm so proud. He used one phase lock loop to not only generate touch tones, but to sense the tone that it was listening
Yeah,
to.
it could listen to
So
any
it could tell if you dialed in 1978 or 77, you could tell if you dialed and got a ringtone or a busy or whatever. And modems weren't going to do that for another 12 years. To save, modems would just have to dial and wait for 30 seconds thinking it might be going through because they couldn't sense the tones and tell.
Remember in '78, Yassi brought me back to Apple to make about 10 more of those boards? Oh, well, we did.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Woz. Stories. Stories to relate under 2 minutes. Apple in '76. Anybody else here?
Get back on time.
To thank Steve for giving us the Apple because we took it into many, many, many schools. We took other computers into schools as well. And we had a storefront computer center and people came and for $10 a month they could get all the unsold time. I think it was $2.50 an hour if you actually bought prime time. $10 a month you could be a member and you could stay there all night. But when Woz first brought the Apple I up to Cotati, California, which is where we had our storefront for Loop Center, it was in a box, and I think it was in actually an old Apple packing crate, wasn't it? Said Apple on the outside. It was a wooden box. And I remember he said, well, we're going to give you one of these. And I knew nothing about computers. I was interested in education and learning, and computers just seemed like a neat toy. So it was great, we're going to get this wonderful computer. But then when we got it, it was just this bare printed circuit board. I had no idea what to do with it at all. So
I would have helped, but Cotati was a long ways away.
yeah, it was a 3-hour drive. But then that's where we needed computers because they weren't going to get there from Sunnyvale any other way. So one of our friends, Glenn Worstel, who was at HP, actually in Santa Rosa, built the blue case that's down there and built a power supply for it. And then I still didn't have a keyboard, and I had to call Woz up and say, well, how do we get anything in or out of this thing? He said, oh, well, buy a keyboard. What kind of a keyboard? Well, you could get a Cherry Pro keyboard, that'll do it. So I had to drive all the way down to Palo Alto from Cotati because there was nothing in Sonoma County where you could buy anything without a computer. So it has a long history. And then, of course, I kept calling him up because we take it into a classroom. We had a 40-minute class. It took 20 minutes to load BASIC off the cassette. And if it didn't load right the first time, if you didn't have a cheap enough tape recorder, or you didn't have the volume set exactly right on the tape recorder, it wouldn't load. So then it would be another 20 minutes to load it, and that was the end of the program. That was the end of the class. So there were many math classes at Windsor Junior High School that didn't get to actually program. They got to learn that computers had variable reliability.
Well, the Apple I BASIC was on cassette tape, so it took a long time to load BASIC in, whereas in the Apple II, we were the first company to use the brand new 2K ROMs, 4 of them, adding up to 8 KB in the Apple II. We're just the first. AMI was supposed to be the first company to come out with them. Theirs didn't come out correctly. We went over to Cinertech, and Cinertech's did. So we used these Cinertech's ROMs, and you turn on the machine, beep. How nice to have BASIC running at your command, in 1/10 of a second. Less than that, actually.
So during that time when that transition was happening, I was calling Steve every couple of weeks saying, what do I do with this thing? I can't use it. You want me to use it in schools? I want to use it in schools. We can't use it. So there was this dialogue going back and forth, and I finally sent the Apple I back to him and said, send me something that I can really use in a complete idiot's environment. So we did it.
Good.
Okay, oh, here we go. Name, serial rank, and serial number.
My name is David Yardrum. I guess I would be guilty of introducing Liza to you. I don't know if I have a story as much as a question, and that is, I didn't have any relationship at all with that computer in my life history. I did work at the time you were doing the Homebrew show. The first one I was working for a company called ProData, whose president was Seymour Rubinstein, so I'm guilty of some of the design of word stuff. Okay, mea culpa. But, and the only other piece of my interaction is that I went to Atari and said goodbye to Steve Jobs the day he left to go to Apple. But I happen to have been sitting next to you on a couple of those occasions when you were entering BASIC at the keyboard of your plywood box machine. And it struck me from looking over your shoulder that you actually did have the ability to backspace and cancel out if you did, not that you made a lot of errors, but didn't you have that ability in that loader?
For the Apple I, backspace for the Apple I, I can't remember. I'm sure I would have put it in. Yeah, why would I not have? Of course, that's one of the advantages of being able to type in a line, yeah.
So,
I only had two, by the way, I only had 256 bytes of program to read in your commands to the Apple I, which were to store data in memory, to examine a block of memory, or run a program at a certain address. Just the things that a front panel would do. And that was 256 bytes. It took 2 chips, 2 PROM chips that we had at HP for developing calculator stuff. That's how few transistors were on typical chips back then.
Yeah. So I actually did have a question.
So of course I might not have backspace because there's a limited amount of time you can write something, but I'm sure I did.
underscore.
So if I could finish there's a small dialogue I'd like. So the other question that,
Oh, yeah, right, right.
that when you announced the product, from what you're saying today, it's much clearer because you explained that you'd had the video done prior, which is something you didn't mention at the Homebrew meeting when you announced the product. You described how you had used address fetch timing to load 128 bytes in 3 segments, or pardon me, twice that perhaps, and then you were using 120 of the 128 available bytes that you loaded because this timing synchronized between the DRAM refresh and the video display refresh. You did the vertical blank processing in the same clock interval that you did the DRAM refresh. And so you're relying on that to do the load. And I, at the time, was working, as I say, for a company that ran Vortex, the operating system, and had lived with people throwing away 8 bytes out of 128 a lot, and asked you what it would take to be able to recover those 8 bytes. And you said about $1.30. And that's why it didn't happen. I think I said something like I should have bought stock, and instead I said programmers might curse your name about having to recover them. But that's old ancient history.
We have, Salam informs me we're now going over enough time that we probably only have time for a couple of questions. We only have time for a couple of questions because we've got a cake to cut and pictures to take and whatnot. So sorry about that. We're kind of crunched. Who's jumping up and down? In the back here? Yeah, come right up for the mic. And state your name, rank, serial number.
John Gilbert, programmer. I've been going over the Woz monitor and some of the code. One thing is just a request to put out in the public a copy of the basic source code. Everyone can disassemble it, but supposedly that was handwritten on paper, and it'd be really great to be able to see your notes and kind of correlate that to the code. The other thing was, could you just kind of go over a timeline as to how you grokked the 6502? Obviously you didn't. Was that the first assembly coding that you were doing? Did you write the monitor before anything else? How did that come along? Thank you.
Okay. What was the first question?
First question is, could you release a copy?
To release a copy, yeah, I've got my handwritten notes of the basic, and I have plans for those. I've mentioned a plan to bring them here to the. I have to get time to kind of document what it is. I mean, I've got the notebooks. I actually saved a really strange thing. I thought that I was onto something big. The Homebrew Computer Club made me feel like this was a revolution. So every single piece of paper that I ever scratched the least bit of thing on went all in chronological order, but no dates on them, into folders. A huge, long thing. I never threw one sheet of paper out through the entire design process. So I still got that kind of stuff. It'll show up someday. I mean, it really belonged almost in the Digibarn more than any other place. But and the second question was?
How did you learn 6502?
How did I learn 6502? Yeah, I had been into computers my whole life. I would sit down with mini computers back in the late 60s when all the companies, Data General, Varian, Hewlett-Packard, Digital Equipment, had mini computers, and I would design my own versions of them in hardware. But I would sit down and try to see how would I start to write assembly language code, even to maybe write something like a Fortran compiler, or at least start reading data. So I would start writing code, but I could never type it into anything. Never had tested assembly language anywhere except, yeah, in college. I programmed an assembly language on the CDC 6600 at Berkeley. Beautiful RISC machine language that I love. I took tons of courses in assembly language at De Anza. A friend of mine even had a key to the computer room where we'd go in at midnight and work through the night. They didn't know we were there. And just run programs. I just loved running programs. So I've been around assembly languages as well as scientific languages. Oddly enough, I'd never programmed in BASIC in my life. Why would I decide to write a BASIC instead of a Fortran? I could just tell that there were books out there like 101 BASIC games, and this was the sort of flavor you had to have for the new interesting computers. Small computers, small low-cost computers for people.
Was the monitor the first
Oh, yeah.
program you wrote?
Yeah. Okay. So was the monitor, that wasn't the first assembly language program I wrote, because I had courses that did in colleges that used assembly languages of big mainframes. For a small computer, like a mini computer or an 8-bit computer, of course it was the first, it was the first assembly language. Yeah, it was the first time I'd ever used that sort of assembly language ever. Wrote it, I programmed it into a couple of ROMs, brought them to my workbench one night. The first set using interrupts on the keyboard didn't work. I couldn't detect exactly why, but then I moved on to the poll routine, and it actually worked, and it shocked me. And I had a 256-byte program done and completed and working, and now it's time to move on to a 4K BASIC.
Thank you.
And I want to say, Digibarn would love to scan all those in for you. Anyway, I want to let you know that last year we actually found a copy of the so-called Woz Wonder Book a couple of years ago, and was able to present that. That's how a lot of the notes from Woz's filing cabinet in the summer of '77. This is the Apple II, and we dutifully scanned it in. A guy in New Mexico hand touched up some of the drawings. It was an old photocopy of these notes, and we put it up under the Digibarn.com and gave a copy back to Woz live the Homebrew event. And so that's kind of and people really value seeing those notes. So we'd love to do that again for the notes you already have. And we have to wrap it up, I've been told by the big cheese. And so we're going to have a great birthday cake cutting here. And we're going to move, and Salam's going to make some notes while I move stuff out of the way and get the cake moved over here. If you want to take pictures of the cake cutting, please maintain a respectful distance a little bit back there. Because we're going to have the cake right here. And then the guys will do the cutting, and then we'll serve cake to anybody who wants it. If you really want the sugar high, it's available to you. And with that, from my part of the program is over, apart from the cake cutting, and really thank you all for being here. And if Woz is feeling well enough, he may sit at the red table there and continue to sign things. If he's not feeling well, it's free to go home at this point. But anyway, thank you very much, and I'm going to pass it over to Salam.
Thanks a lot, Bruce, and thanks to everyone who asked those great questions. I just wanted to say a couple things, and then we're going to do the giveaway of the replica one, so don't go away yet if you're interested in that. One of the things I do want to mention is it's kind of interesting for me because, Chris, you have hand in this, and this is the Apple II reference manual, and in high school, this was my Bible. I basically walked around with this. This is the actual copy. I tried to find the actual copy. But this is basically, this was you know, my religion was the Apple II reference manual. I had a very tattered copy that I carried around with me. It had a peachy folder cover over it to keep the cover from falling apart. And this is what I basically refer to on a daily basis to unlock the mysteries of the great Apple II. And so the way it's interesting because the whole you know, I grew up on the Apple II, and it's kind of interesting that these guys sort of have come around in a way in full circle, because my passion that led me to do this event was begun by these guys and what they built, and the passion it instilled in me to basically get into computers and continue on and you know, make a career out of it. So it's definitely exciting for me. So anyway, I have, in honor of Woz's love of games and things, I've come up with a kind of novel way for giving away this Replica 1, which we're going to do right now. And it's kind of experimental. I hope it works. So let me try to first boot up the computer, which is always on. And Chris, what's kind of the history behind this, and then that led into the reference manual?
Well, the first documentation for the Apple II was a set of programmer's notes that people assembled and that were taken down to an instant printer on a regular basis and done in batches of 50 or 100 like that in report covers. And every week there'd be a different set of stuff. So, you know, if you got a mini manual, that was what it was called. Yours was probably unlike any other mini manual you could find, because every production run had a different set of content according to what had been written and what had been found. At some point, Mike Scott got a little disgusted that we didn't have a real manual looking like manual, so he took the contents of the mini manual and whatever information he could find. There's a complete listing of the ROM in here. There's some things that I typed up on an IBM Selectric typewriter in my bedroom and hand illustrated. There's some things written by Dana Reddington. There's things written by Woz. There's a bunch of output from that 40-column electrostatic printer in the shiny silver paper that it burned through, and you could smell it when it printed. And he had Sherry Livingston type up everything else and took it down to the instant printer, put it all together in an order that seemed reasonable, and pasted with page numbers onto the bottom, and had it printed up. This is the Apple II Reference Manual, January 1978, and there was never really another like this. When I went off to college in September of '78, Jeff Raskin gave me a copy of this, saying, I know you're going off to college, I think you might want a part-time job to have some spending money, so why don't you write a real reference manual? And that was about the degree of instruction he gave me. So I went up to Berkeley, I got an account on Unix A that Apple paid for. He raised my salary to $5 an hour. Oh. And that actually paid my way through college, believe it or not. And by the next June, I had produced on the Unix system in VI using TROF. The final draft of the Apple II reference manual, except the big problem, and this is where I nearly got Andy Hirschfeld kicked out of the school. The big problem was that the book wasn't done, but school was. And I had just finished my finals and needed to pull a couple of all-nighters to do the final proofs, but it took too long to wait for the phototypesetter to print out 200 pages. Andy was a grad student, and he had access to the VAX, the 11780 on the 5th floor of Evans, which underclassmen did not have access to. And attached to the VAX was the Versatech 36-inch platen printer plotter, the Waterloo driver for TROF, and I was able to do 4 pages up of proofs fast as the machine could spool them out, instead of waiting 2 days for 200 pages of phototypesetting to come out. And so I was up there previewing and proofing the manuals in the graduate student area, and here I was a freshman. You know, 11 at night, 12 at night, 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning. Well, you know how that turns into 7 in the morning. And when the graduate student advisors came in and saw this freshman using their 36-inch printer and their precious VAX 11780, which had, that had 16K of memory in it, I guess. They asked questions and nearly got me and Andy kicked out of school, but I got the manual done, took it down to Apple, and they bound it, and that's what's there.
So we need to turn on the projector to do my silly giveaway contest here, so we don't want to blind you guys. All right. So this is a puzzle, and the way it's going to work is whoever, or the part of the puzzle is to figure out how to figure out the puzzle. If that makes any sense. So basically, the first person who thinks they have the answer, just go ahead and blurt it out, and we will try to identify you orally. And here we go. Okay, here we go. So, as soon as you have the answer, blurt it out, and whoever blurts out the correct answer first wins the Replica 1, courtesy of Livingroom Homebrew Computers. Okay, here we go. 42. Steve Wozniak. Who said it first? Yeah. There he goes, Steve Wozniak. The answer is Steve Wozniak. What this is an anagram of Steve Wozniak. Now, Steve Wozniak, whenever you email Woz, he has an anagram of his name as his signature. And so I found this handy thing called, I always try to come up with a really clever one that maybe Steve hadn't heard of before that maybe he might admire, but I cheated and used the internet anagram server to come up with these. So I'll just show you the other ones that I came up with. They're kind of cute. So here's and here's one. That one's pretty. That one I actually came up with on my own a long time ago, but I never had a chance to email Woz and see if he was impressed with it. There's another one. And then, of course, this is what you get if Woz responds to your inquiry. So.
Or okay, a new size TV.
Or okay, a new size TV, correct. So anyway, so that's our silly giveaway, and I'm glad that somebody who will really appreciate it got it. Ken Summerall, very good. And cake time. I guess we'll move the cake into the floor over here, and we'll do cutting, and we'll ask our panel to participate in that and take the first bites. And then, what do you guys think as far as we have a big line of folks here who would look pretty enthusiastic, I guess. Got to be hanging out for a little while. Okay, good. And I guess that's it. Everybody's welcome to enjoy some cake. We'll try to make as many pieces as possible. And this has been a wonderful event. And we've still got a lot more to go. It's only 3 o'clock. We have the exhibit hall open at 3 o'clock. I'm sorry, till 6 o'clock. And we have the